The pen pauses. Not long. Not long enough for anyone watching to notice. Maybe half a second. The kind of hesitation that lives below the threshold of human observation, but above the threshold of your own awareness. You sign the name. Not your name. A name that belongs to a man who stopped needing it 11 years ago. A man whose death was processed by a county clerk on a Thursday afternoon, filed between two other cases, cross-referenced against nothing. You found him the way you find everything. By looking at the place everyone else decided wasn't worth looking at. The woman across the desk smiles, slides the folder closed, says something about processing time. You nod, say something back, and the exchange is so ordinary that neither of you will remember it in 4 hours. This is what 11 years of practice looks like. Not dramatic, not tense, just a man in a chair, signing a name, walking out into the afternoon light like someone with nowhere particular to be. You have nowhere particular to be. That's by design. Rewind, not 11 years. Further than that, go back to the office building in Charlotte. The fluorescent lights that buzzed at a frequency just below irritating. The desk where you processed vendor authorizations for people who made 40 times what you made and assumed that meant they understood 40 times more about how money moved. They didn't. You did. Not because you were smarter, because you were invisible. The temp, the one who refiled the documents no one else wanted to touch. The one who stayed late, not out of ambition, but because the alternative was an apartment that smelled like the neighbor's cooking. And in that invisibility, you saw something. Not money. Money was the obvious thing. What you saw was the architecture beneath the money. The rules, the gaps between the rules, and the critical flaw that held the entire structure together. Everyone in that building was operating on a single assumption, that you were afraid. You weren't. That was the first gap, and unlike the ones that would come later, this one didn't exist in any system. It existed in them. You don't look for money, you look for the space between rules. Rules have edges, and edges, if you trace them carefully enough, have gaps. Not errors, gaps. The distinction matters. An error is an accident waiting to be fixed. A gap is a feature the architect didn't know they built. The gap in Charlotte's wire transfer system was 72 hours wide. 72 hours between approval and verification. 72 hours during which a transfer existed in a financial space that belonged to everyone on paper and no one in practice. You found it not by hacking anything, not by bribing anyone, but by reading the internal documentation that 3 different compliance officers had been assigned to update and none of them had. You read it on a Tuesday afternoon. You spent the next 3 weeks doing nothing, watching, counting, running the sequence in your head the way an engineer stress tests a bridge before walking across it. You mapped every checkpoint, every human touch point, every moment where someone could look at the wrong thing at the wrong time. There were 4. You neutralized all 4 before you moved $1. The transfer itself took 11 minutes. $40,000 routed through a vendor account you built inside the company's own onboarding system. A system you accessed because you were the temp who processed new vendor accounts. The credentials belonged to a senior manager who used the same password for his work login, his personal email, and you later confirmed his gym membership. People protect the vault. Nobody protects the key. The money moved twice more before the verification window closed. Delaware, Nevada. By the time the discrepancy surfaced, the accounts were closed and the trail ended at a man who was still employed, still swiping his badge every morning, still entirely unaware that 11 weeks of federal investigation were about to make his life very uncomfortable. You filed your last timesheet on a Friday, thanked your supervisor, took the elevator down. Somewhere above you, a case file was about to open. The agent assigned to it was named Reeves. He was thorough, methodical, and very good at his job. He would spend 9 months of his life looking for you. He would get very close. The second time is faster, not because the method is simpler, because you are. Something recalibrates after the first one. Not your morality exactly, more like your threat response. The part of the brain that fires when you're about to do something wrong goes quiet the second time. By the third time, it doesn't fire at all. That should scare you more than the FBI does. Atlanta, $120,000? Medical billing company. 4 months inside the architecture, long enough to understand how the payment system breathed, short enough that nobody thought to remember your face when the questions started. You left the same way you left Charlotte. Timesheet filed, supervisor thanked, no forwarding address, no loose ends. Then Boston, $200,000. Insurance company, cleaner than Atlanta, faster than Charlotte. The shell accounts layered 3 levels deep this time. The credentials belong to a director with 17 years of tenure and a digital footprint large enough that one additional login registered as noise. 3 cities, 3 gaps, $360,000 in total. And somewhere in a field office, a woman named Chen was looking at the shape of what you left behind, not evidence. Evidence is what you find when someone makes a mistake. Chen wasn't looking for mistakes. She was looking for the absence of them. Or 3 wire fraud cases with the same structural signature, same gap exploitation, same credential compromise, same 72-hour close window, same clean departure. She wrote a memo. 4 agents read it. A task force formed. They didn't know your name. They knew something more dangerous. Your method. And that method, unlike the name, doesn't change when you move cities. A method is the one thing you carry with you everywhere without realizing it. They called you the ghost, not as a compliment, as an admission. No face in the surveillance footage, no prints, no witnesses who remembered anything useful. Just a pattern that kept appearing in different cities with the precision of something that had been practiced until it felt like instinct. Which, by Boston, it had. The task force had a profile. The profile had your shape. They just didn't have you yet. 12 names. That's how many temps in finance departments across 3 companies left within 30 days of each loss. 12 people whose employment records, bank statements, and rental histories were now sitting in a federal database being cross-referenced against each other by an agent named Torres who had not taken a weekend in 6 weeks. You are one of the 12. You don't know that yet. You're in Denver, inside a logistics company's accounts payable system, mapping a 96-hour verification window that represents $180,000 in accessible float. 3 weeks from execution. The gap is cleaner than anything you've built before. The credential vector is already identified. The exit routing is designed and tested. It is by every technical measure your best work. Torres clears 4 names in the first week. Employment alibis. Financial records that actually match stated income. The kind of lives that are messy in the way innocent lives are messy. Unpredictable spending, overlapping debts, the financial fingerprint of someone who doesn't plan more than 2 months ahead. Your finances don't look like that. 8 names. Torres pulls your bank records on a Tuesday. What he sees isn't suspicious on its surface. Modest income, modest spending, frequent relocations explained by short-term contract work. But the pattern underneath is wrong in a way that takes him 4 hours to articulate in his notes. You're not spending, you're preserving. Every financial decision is load-bearing. Nothing is impulsive. People who steal and don't spend, Torres writes, are not impulsive. They are strategic. 5 names. In Denver, you feel it before you can name it. A temp agency that takes 48 hours to return a call that should have taken 2. A landlord who asks for a second reference after already signing the lease. A routine bank transaction that triggers a 3-second processing delay where there was never a delay before. None of it is evidence. All of it is signal. You've spent 3 years learning to read financial systems. The skill transfers. You know what a system looks like when it's operating normally. You know what it looks like when something upstream has changed. Something upstream has changed. 3 names. Torres is reading your file right now in an office in a federal building you've never been inside. A man who has never seen your face is building a timeline of your movements and finding a rhythm he recognizes. You have 72 hours to decide. Stay and execute $180,000 or walk away from the best gap you've ever found because the cost of being wrong isn't money. It's decades. You leave on a Wednesday morning. No dramatic exit, no burned documents, no midnight drive. You pack what fits in one bag, which is everything you own that matters. Settle the rent 3 days early and walk to your car in the same unhurried way you walk everywhere. The gap in Denver is worth $180,000. The cost of being wrong is a number you've already calculated and it doesn't fit in a dollar figure. You understand math better than you understand greed. That's what saves you. Salt Lake City is 400 miles and one identity away. The physical changes come first because they're the easiest. Hair shorter. Glasses instead of contacts, different cut of clothing, different color palette, a different way of carrying your shoulders. Surveillance systems catalog silhouette before they catalog features. Change the silhouette and you change what the camera sees. The behavioral changes take longer and matter more. You retrain the micro habits. The way you order coffee be different. The way you make eye contact with strangers, calibrated down by 30%. The route you take from any building's entrance to its exit, Always mapped before you need it. None of these things appear in any federal profile. None of them can be photographed or subpoenaed. But they are the difference between a person and a ghost. You take a job at a hardware store, cash register, inventory, a name tag with a name that isn't yours but fits well enough by the second week that you stop noticing the gap between it and you. You become boring. Deliberately, systematically, completely boring. And boring, you have learned, is the only camouflage that actually works. Torres arrives in Denver 23 days after you leave. He interviews your landlord, who describes someone quiet and unremarkable. He interviews 2 co-workers who struggle to remember specific details about your appearance. He stands in your empty apartment, cleaned, cleared, stripped of every object that could carry a print or a data point. And he knows. He knows you're his suspect. He opens his notebook. He has nothing for court. Your name moves to a watch list that afternoon. Watch lists, you already know, only work when the person being watched continues to exist. David Park ceases to exist on a Thursday in Denver. The man who drives out of Salt Lake City 3 days later has a different name, a different history, and 11 years ahead of him to make it real. $360,000 sounds like freedom. Run the actual math, and it sounds like something else. 2 years of cash jobs, hardware store, restaurant, landscaping crew, generate zero traceable income, and approximately $28,000 annually in untaxed wages that you don't deposit anywhere. Your burn rate is minimal by design. Rent in cash, food in cash. Nothing subscribed, nothing recurring, nothing that creates a data point that can be queried by a federal database at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, when an analyst decides to run your old social security number through current employment records. Chen runs it every 90 days. You don't know that. You're stacking firewood behind a house in rural Utah, watching the number in your head decrease with the same mathematical certainty you once used to map verification windows. By year 2, the total is under $260,000. By year 3, $190,000. The runway has a visible end now. You can see it the way you can see the last few pages of a book. Not the final word yet, but the weight of what's left has shifted in your hand. Income minus expenses equals runway. Your income is zero. Your expenses are minimal but compounding. The equation has one direction. This is the part nobody tells you about disappearing. The logistics are solvable. New name, new city, new behavioral profile. The finances are solvable. Live small, spend cash, leave no pattern. What isn't solvable is the particular quality of silence that accumulates when every relationship in your life is capped at a depth of approximately 6 weeks. You can know someone for 2 years and keep them at 6 weeks depth. It requires constant management. Redirect here, deflect there. Introduce just enough personal detail to feel authentic without introducing anything that could be verified. It works. It also costs something you don't have a name for yet. By year 3, you're 30 years old and watching a number shrink towards 0 with the focused attention of someone who understands that at the end of that number is not poverty. It's a choice. Legitimate work under an identity Torres is still monitoring. Or a new method. New enough that Chen's algorithm, built to recognize the old one, won't flag it. You go back. Not to the old method. The old method is a door Chen has already framed and painted and is waiting beside with considerable patience. You build a new door entirely. Investment consulting. Gray area. No vault, no wire transfers, just credentials that don't exist and clients who will never compare notes. The math starts moving in the right direction again. His name was Michael Calloway. He died in Boise on a February morning in 2014 from pancreatic cancer, age 54, no children, no spouse, one younger sister in Portland who handled the arrangements and filed the paperwork and moved on with her life the way people do when grief has a practical shape to it. The county clerk who processed the death certificate did not cross-reference the Social Security database for 6 months. In those 6 months, Michael Calloway's identity existed in the same kind of gap you had spent years learning to find and occupy. You found him the way you find everything, by looking at the place nobody else thought was worth looking at. The town in Oregon is small enough that strangers become familiar within 2 weeks, and familiar becomes trusted within 2 months. The house you rent sits on a street where the neighbors know each other's cars. The hardware store 3 blocks from the main intersection has been owned by the same family for 26 years. The barber on the corner knows how you take your hair without asking. You are, by every observable measure, a member of this community. Your name is Michael. You grew up in Portland. Your parents died in a car accident 8 years ago, which explains why no one can meet them. And you moved around for work before settling here because you were tired of cities. It is a backstory assembled from the most statistically common grief narratives, internally consistent, impossible to verify without effort, most people would never bother to make. Every conversation you have runs through a half-second internal audit before you respond. Not long enough to register as hesitation, long enough to ensure that nothing you say today contradicts anything you said last Tuesday. This is the cognitive cost nobody accounts for, not the fear of arrest, that has receded to a background frequency, manageable, familiar. The cost is the processing, the constant, automatic, exhausting processing of every ordinary exchange through the filter of what Michael from Portland would say versus what you actually know, remember, or feel. Then you meet Sarah. Sarah teaches 4th grade 3 blocks from the hardware store. She laughs at things that are only slightly funny and takes that quality seriously in other people. She asks questions the way someone does when they're actually interested in the answer rather than just filling silence. She asks a lot of questions. The 6th month, she mentions casually over dinner that she's never been the type to rush anything. You change the subject in 0.3 seconds. It takes her another 4 months to mention it again. She mentions it on a Sunday evening in October, not directly. Sarah doesn't operate directly. She approaches things the way water approaches rock, patient and consistent and ultimately reshaping. She says a friend from college just got engaged. Says it the way people say things they want you to respond to without having to ask you to respond to it. You say, "That's great. Ask about the friend." She looks at you for exactly 1 second longer than the conversation requires. You've spent 11 years learning to read systems. You know what that second means. Here is the equation as it exists on that Sunday evening in October, stated in the only language your mind defaults to under pressure. Variable 1. You marry her. Marriage requires a license. A license requires a legal identity submitted to a government database for verification. You know, Michael Calloway's identity was built for depth of field, not for forensic scrutiny. It holds against a curious landlord. It does not hold against a federal records check triggered by a marriage application in a state where the Social Security Administration still cross-references death records. Variable 2. You tell her the truth. All of it. Charlotte, Atlanta, Boston, Denver, David Park. The 11 years of architecture built on a dead man's name. The FBI file that is technically cold but monitored quarterly by an analyst in a federal building who has built an algorithm specifically shaped to your method. You tell her everything and you lose everything. Her, the town, the life, and very likely your freedom within 18 months as she processes what you've told her and makes the only reasonable decision available to her. Variable 3. You keep deflecting. Change the subject one more time. Then again. Then again. Watch the space between her questions grow shorter and her silences grow longer until she makes her own calculation and arrives at a conclusion that doesn't require your input. 3 variables, 0 solutions. It is the first mathematical problem you have encountered in 11 years that cannot be solved by finding the gap. There is no gap. There is no arbitrage. There is no version of this equation where you walk away with what you came in with. Across the country, Torres mentions your case over lunch to a colleague, calls it the one that got away. You are an abstraction to him now, a method without a face, a file that generates no active investigative hours. You are the most alone you have ever been. Sarah calls from the kitchen, asks if you want more wine. You say yes. By every metric the FBI uses, you have won. No active warrant, no case agent running your name through morning briefings, no surveillance, no wiretap, no confidential informant who knows your face. Chen's algorithm scans wire fraud reports every week across 43 states and finds nothing flagged to your structural signature because your structural signature no longer exists in any active operation. Torres is a supervisor now. He manages 11 agents and attends budget meetings and thinks about your case approximately once a quarter, briefly, the way you think about a word you've forgotten. with mild frustration and no real expectation of recovery. The ghost is a cold case getting colder. The consulting work generates $80,000 a year from clients in 4 states who have never met each other and never will. The credentials are fabricated, but the work is real. We like financial models, operational templates, advisory frameworks that genuinely help the small businesses that hire you. There's a particular irony in being very good at the legitimate version of the thing you built a criminal career around, and you have made peace with that irony in the way you make peace with most things now, quietly, without discussing it with anyone. Sarah stopped asking about marriage 7 months ago, not because she stopped wanting it, because she made a decision you didn't ask her to make, and she hasn't told you she made it. She decided that whatever you are hiding is less catastrophic than what you have together. She decided the incomplete version of you is worth staying for because the complete version has made clear it isn't available. It is the most generous thing anyone has ever done for you. It is also the heaviest thing you carry. Your mother is 62. She lives in the same house in Charlotte where you grew up, in the same neighborhood with the same phone number she has had for 30 years. She believes you live in California. You send money twice a year through a routing method you designed to be untraceable. She calls the number you gave her and it rings to a voicemail you check from a device registered to a name that doesn't exist. Some nights you run the probability calculation, her age, her health trajectory, the realistic timeline for resolving an identity fraud situation that has no clean resolution, the probability that she will die before you figure out how to walk back through a door you closed 11 years ago. The number is higher than you want it to be. You do not run the calculation on those nights more than once. The statute of limitations on wire fraud is 10 years. You knew that going in. You calculated it the same way you calculated everything. Methodically, without sentiment, as a variable in an equation that needed to balance. 10 years and the federal exposure dissolves. 10 years and Charlotte becomes a closed file in a storage facility that nobody opens unless someone gives them a specific reason to. You are past 10 years now. What you did not calculate, what does not appear in any statute, any federal code, any legal framework you researched across the 3 jurisdictions, is the sentence that has no expiration date. Identity fraud has no statute of limitations, and neither does the architecture you built around yourself. Every fabricated document, every curated memory, every relationship filtered through the question of how much this person can know before knowing becomes dangerous. You did not build a life. You built a structure designed to look like a life from the outside. And the difference between those two things is not something you understood at 23 and cannot unfeel at 34. Across the street, the neighbor who brings tomatoes from her garden waves from her porch. You wave back. She knows your name. It is not your name. She has known it for 6 years. And the warmth in her wave is entirely genuine and entirely directed at a person who does not exist. Sarah brings dinner out, sets it on the table between the 2 chairs. You moved to the porch in April and never moved back. She sits down and the evening arranges itself around the 2 of you the way evenings do in small towns. Gradually, without announcement, the light fading and the street going quiet, and the ordinary sounds of other people's lives drifting across the distance. You eat dinner with a woman who loves you. She does not know your name. In a storage facility in Charlotte, case file 2009-CR-4471 runs to 847 pages. Your name appears on page 3 attached to an employment record and a social security number that belonged to someone who no longer exists. It is never mentioned again, neither are you.